our eighth talk in our International Philosophy Talk series held by the Department of Philosophy at Marmara University, Istanbul, Turkey. Today we are honored to have Professor Maeve Cooke from University College Dublin with us, and her talk is entitled Re-Envisioning Freedom, Ethical Agency in the Anthropocene. Maeve Cooke is a professor of philosophy at University College Dublin and a member of the Royal Irish Academy. Her research interests are critical social theory, political philosophy, philosophy of law, philosophy of religion, autonomy and authority, protest and resistance, and theorizing the Anthropocene. She's on the editorial board of a number of scholarly journals and has held visiting appointments at leading universities in the US and in Europe. She is also the author of various publications in areas of social and political philosophy particularly. And among these various publications, I'm just going to mention a few books of hers. Representing the Good Society, published by MIT Press in 2006. Another one entitled On the Pragmatics of Communication, published in 1998, again by MIT Press. And also Language and Reason, a study of Habermas's pragmatics, again published by MIT Press in 1994. Professor Maeve Cooke also has received many grants for her research, and to name some of the most recent ones, Ethics and Politics in the Anthropocene, Non-Secular Democracy, Public Reasoning, Constitutional Law and Democratic Theory, and the third research project, which is Prepared for Every Fortune, Cynicism as an Analytical and Normative Perspective in Democratic Theory. So today's talk will last about 45 to 50 minutes, roughly speaking, and we are going to have a little break afterwards, and then we'll have the Q&A session. So please join me in welcoming Professor Maeve Cooke, and thank you again for participating in our Philosophy Talk series.
Thank you very much, Sinam, and thank you everybody who's coming. I see one or two familiar faces, and it's always nice to see new faces as well. I'll begin. Ecological disaster has happened and continues to happen, much of it irreversible. At stake is the survival of the human species. The COVID pandemic, together with the increasing frequency and violence of flash floods, heat waves, wildfires and the like, have contributed to a growing perception of human vulnerability to natural forces. What is the place of human agency in this catastrophic situation? How is it contributed to ecological disaster? Can changes in human thinking and acting, and in how humans think about their own thinking and acting, help to arrest our currently perilous trajectory and redirect it for the better? It's hard to deny that human agency has been a contributing factor to ecological disaster. Indeed, the term, the Anthropocene, which highlights the anthropogenic character of our global ecological disaster, has now gained widespread currency. But I'm going to leave aside the debates in the natural sciences and humanities, human sciences, as to the accuracy and appropriateness of this word, the Anthropocene, leaving that aside. Today, there is little dispute among natural scientists, at least, that rapid anthropogenic climate change and loss of biodiversity are major threats to the future of humanity. Moreover, there's a growing awareness among natural scientists that human perceptions of their own agency have led to and perpetuate the current disaster. If this is so, even the most revolutionary technological breakthroughs will be insufficient to redirect our currently perilous trajectory. They will have to be accompanied by a fundamentally new perspective on human agency. And this is why I focus on human agency. I claim that the survival of the human species depends in significant measure on fundamentally new ways of ethical thinking and acting. The envisaged new ways of thinking and acting call for new modes of relationality, specifically for critically reflective, self-directed, ecologically attuned ethical relations between humans and other humans and non-human others. I see this new mode of agency as a re-envisioning of freedom. The idea of individual human freedom breaks decisively with the ideal of individual freedom characteristic of capitalist modernity, which expresses an attitude of manipulation and control. Typically, it has been articulated as an ideal of individual sovereignty. Whether it's understood negatively as freedom from external interference or positively as self-determination, the liberal idea of liberty, freedom, is undergirded by the conviction that human freedom entails absolute sovereignty, the possession and exercise of a will that chooses and determines more or less just as it pleases. Intimately connected with a belief in the limitless potential of human agency, this liberal ideal has assumed a plenitude of inexhaustible resources, enabling an ever-expanding range of human choices, self-gratifying consumption, and uninhibited self-expression. For this reason, I contend that any new path pursued in the contemporary efforts to arrest ecological disaster involves reimagining the powers of human agency, and as part of this, reimagining individual human freedom in relational rather than atomistic terms. Recently, there have been a number of interesting attempts within political philosophy to rethink the idea of freedom in social relational terms. In line with this development, I construe freedom as a specific form of social freedom, in the sense that it's a kind of freedom that's available only in a social context through relationships with other persons. However, I now move beyond a purely social perspective to make it dependent on interactions with non-humans as well as humans. In this new imagining and articulation of freedom, I see it as a mode of ethically oriented, critically engaged, self-transformative, and ecologically attuned human agency. In the first part of my paper today, I present the main features of my new vision. And in order to give a better sense of my still quite sketchy idea of freedom, in the second part, I will contrast my re-envisioning of freedom with two recent contributions to debates on agency that at first glance seem very close to my own concerns. However, I argue that they differ from mine in crucial respects. The first point of comparison and contrast is the imagining of freedom as resonant, self-efficacious subjectivity offered by the social theorist Hartmut Rosa in his book Resonant. The second is the imagining of freedom as idleness offered by my colleague here in Dublin, Brian O'Connor, in his philosophical essay, Idleness.
Maeve, if I may interrupt, sorry, everyone. It seems maybe the papers you're reading from, maybe they are touching the speaker, or, so there is a lot of distortion. It's
okay, sorry. Yeah, maybe it is. Yeah, sorry, I was trying to, not to rustle the papers, but maybe it's better to rustle the papers. Yeah, so I've moved it away from the keyboard now, so sorry about that. Thanks. Okay, if it happens again, tell me, and maybe sometimes there's background interference, so, but let's hope it's just that.
Other than that, it's perfect.
Okay, good, sorry about that. So anyway, I'm going to start part one now. So I hope it was more or less intelligible what I said. Okay. Yes. The survival of the human species depends in significant measure on fundamental transformation in ethical attitudes, behavior, and social practices. As I've mentioned, I seek to offer a picture of new ways of thinking and acting based on new modes of ethical relationality between human agents and their human and non-human others. I refer to these as ecologically attuned ethical relations. In this new picture, relationality goes hand in hand with a commitment to a reimagined and rearticulated idea of individual human freedom. In the reimagining, freedom entails both ecologically attuned agency and a critically engaged self-transformative form of self-direction. Here, though, importantly, self-direction does not have the liberal meaning of the right of individuals to choose and decide as they please, subject only to some very general moral or social norms. Instead, self-direction is interpreted as a critically reflective relation of the self to the self, within multiple human and non-human interrelationships, oriented by a concern for the good and receptive to the possibility that this may call for self-transformation. Despite the troubling history of freedom as self-determination, which I pass over, but I'm sure it's familiar to most of you, I mean the liberal ideal of freedom as sovereignty and the attitude of manipulation and control with which it goes hand in hand. So this has had a troubling history. Despite its troubling history and the troubling history of freedom, even freedom as self-determination, the self-directing component is indispensable. In our contemporary ecological catastrophic situation, humans need a picture of agency and corresponding vocabulary that enables themselves to see themselves as contributing to the shape of their own futures. Widespread feelings of powerlessness in the face of ecological disaster are not conducive to ethically oriented fundamental social and political transformation. Indeed, such feelings of powerlessness tend to provoke reactions that either repeat the attitudes of manipulation and control that have been a significant factor in bringing about the contemporary disaster, or they lead to resignation, apathy, and despair. If social and political change for the better is to happen, individuals and the collectives of which they're part must desire change and feel empowered to struggle to achieve it. Individually and collectively, they must feel capable of playing a part in shaping their own futures and affirm the human capacity for self-direction. Socially and politically transformative action is always motivated by a desire for a better society, for a good society in which each individual could lead a good life. This desire may not be articulated linguistically or indeed explicitly, it may be quite inchoate. Notwithstanding their emancipatory intention, however, efforts to achieve a better society may unwittingly reproduce patterns of thought and behavior, trapping humans in social and political conditions that prevent them from leading ethically good lives. For this reason, critical reflection, coupled with receptivity to new ways of seeing things, must be part of the process of self-direction. In my work over the past years, I've elaborated a distinctive conception of social freedom that ties it to a critically reflective concern for the good, whereby I have left open deliberately the precise shape and content of the good. In my current proposed reimagining in the context of the Anthropocene, I claim that human freedom requires more than interaction with other humans. It also requires interaction with non-human others. These interactions are ethically inflected in the sense that they're oriented by a concern for the good. So in my new undertaking in the context of ecological disaster, I issue an invitation to imagine the shape and content of this concern for the good in a specific way, as what I've called an ecologically attuned concern for the good, a concern driving human agents who relate in an ethically non-hierarchical way to others, human and non-human. In other words, I now imagine the good as a critically engaged projection of how humans and human and non-human entities should dwell together on Earth on an ethically equal footing. This calls for attentiveness to the specific qualities of individual agents, as well as to the ways in which they interact with the multiplicity of other agents in the biosphere. Moreover, dwelling together in an ethically non-hierarchical way means that humans see all other agents as depositories of the good, as having a value that has some independence of human concerns and interests. In other words, in my new re-envisioning of freedom, the good is not determined exclusively by human concerns and interests, but is a good for every entity, human and non-human. In this imaginative projection, claims to the validity of human ideas of the good, which are likely always to be multiple and conflicting, are treated as human transcending in a double sense. First, in the sense of universal in scope, for they encompass non-human and human concerns and interests. Second, in the sense of truth analogous, for their validity is deemed to be inherently transcending of human reasoning, though nonetheless dependent on it. And my claim here, just as an aside, is that human reasoning is necessary in order to evaluate claims to validity, and evaluation is in turn indispensable for the purposes of social and political critique. An ethically non-hierarchical perspective and the orientation towards a non-human, or towards a, let's say, a human transcending idea of the good required for this, is one core feature of my re-envisioning of human freedom. Again, as already mentioned, a second key feature is critically engaged self-direction. In elaborating this idea of self-direction, I draw on Marx's writings on alienation in his early work in his 1844 economic and philosophical manuscripts. As is well known, Marx describes three forms of alienation in these early writings: alienation of humans from their work, understood as freely purposive, creative activity; alienation of humans from the products of this activity; and alienation of humans from their species being. By alienation of humans from their species being, I understand to mean alienation of humans from their capacity for freely purposive, creative, self-reflective activity. As I read the early Marx, he understands freedom not only as the capacity of humans to set goals and pursue them without being bound by biological necessity, as he puts it, as the capacity to create according to the laws of beauty, as opposed to as determined by biological necessity. But in addition, he understands freedom as the capacities of humans to make their life activity into the object of their will and consciousness. That's what he says. Free conscious activity is, as he puts it, the species character of man. And this is why alienated labor alienates humans from their own being as a species. However, Marx doesn't satisfactorily develop this thought in his early manuscripts. Charles Taylor's view of the modern self as a strong evaluator can, in my view, help to explicate it. Taylor holds that humans are self-interpreting creatures. By this, he means that human relationships to the world are never simply given, but are constantly articulated, reconstituted, negotiated, and transformed through individual and collective cultural processes of interpretation. Furthermore, human interpretations of the world are always also interpretations of the self, and vice versa. The process of self-interpretation is driven by what Taylor calls strong evaluations. At any given time, these strong evaluations constitute evaluative roadmaps for human individuals. Stable identities and methodical human action are inconceivable without such roadmaps, which depict substantial ethical conceptions that embody ideas of the good, ideas about what's important, what really matters. On my understanding, strong evaluation is a mode of self-determination. This is because, or let's say self-determination. This is because it requires human agents to ascertain for themselves what kind of person they would like to be and what paths they should pursue if they are to become that kind of person. Furthermore, it requires human individuals to take responsibility for their evaluative judgments. I see the critically evaluating moments of strong evaluation as crucially important. Self-determination calls for evaluative discrimination by human agents among the aims in life they consider worth pursuing. Put differently, it calls for critical evaluation by human agents of the ethical quality of their actions, judgments, and life trajectories. And that's how I envisage, in a nutshell, that's how I envisage the self-directing component of individual human freedom, the self-determining, self-directing component. I envisage it as a critically reflective concern for an ethically good life. It's coupled with an attitude vis-a-vis others, human and non-human, that is ethically non-hierarchical. That's not necessary, but I make it ecologically attuned, because I think that's what's appropriate in our current context of ecological disaster. So I couple strong evaluation with an attitude, ecologically attuned attitude, one that's ethically non-hierarchical, which calls for attentiveness to specificity as well as to relationality. And both of these components, attentiveness to specificity and to relationality, require receptivity to new ways of seeing things. For in my proposed re-envisioning of freedom or self-determination, critical self-evaluation from the point of view of a human transcendent idea of the good entails, because it entails ecological attunement, it calls for openness to experiences in which our interconnectedness with others within the biosphere makes itself felt in a full-bodied way to each of us. Such experiences, Taylor talks about experiences of fullness, such experiences may have a disclosive power. He doesn't go into that sufficiently, I think, but I think that's important. By disclosive, I mean opening up, the power to open up new spaces of the imagination. So such experiences of fullness, where something makes itself present to us or felt to us in a full-bodied way, that these experiences may have a disclosive power. They may potentially open our hearts and minds to fundamentally new self-understandings and demand fundamental changes in ethical thinking and behavior. In order to explain why I attach such importance to self-determination or self-direction in this sense of critically reflective, strong evaluation, I will contrast my imagining of freedom with the account of non-alienated agency recently offered by the social theorist Hartmut Rosa in his 2015 book, Resonance. It came out later in English. Resonance is the key category in Rosa's critical social theory. He uses this acoustic phenomenon to formulate a social scientific tool of analysis that is at once descriptive and normative. His normative claim is that humans are existentially shaped by their longing for resonant relationships. Here he employs the concept of resonance as what he calls a meta-criterion, in other words, as the measure of a good life in the ethical sense of a well-lived one within a corresponding good society, again, in an ethical sense. On occasion, Rosa makes clear that he views resonance as the modern promise of freedom, characterizing the project of European modernity as a dialectical movement between desire for mastery of the world and desire for resonance through adaptive transformation of the world. He writes, I quote from Rosa, "The project of modernity is defined by the strategy of increasing humanity's share of the world, so by possession and control, but it is motivated by the hope of adaptively transforming the world, by the hope that we can go out into the world that finds a place that speaks to us or appeals to us, where we can feel at home, that we can make our own. This," he says, "is the promise of the modern idea of freedom. And finding our place in the world here means establishing vital relationships in all directions, in all dimensions." So he unpacks this idea of freedom in terms of what he calls a resonant mode of self-efficacious subjectivity. There's much to commend in his approach. However, I argued that he underplays a component that historically has been central for critiques of alienation: Marx's idea of freedom as self-conscious, freely purposive activity. Rosa sees resonant, self-efficacious subjectivity as a non-alienating form of being, but I'm saying he neglects the central element in Marx's critique of alienation, the one I alluded to a little while ago. Rosa does indeed describe Marx's analysis of alienation as groundbreaking, but he passes over the importance for Marx's analysis of self-reflective creative activity and hence of freedom as a form of self-determination, which I try to unpack a little bit. For Rosa, by contrast, resonance describes a mode of being in the world, a specific way in which human subjects and various segments of the world enter into relationship with each other. His core idea is that subjects have a need and desire mutually to interact with each other and with our social, material, and natural environments in such a way that each can be understood as responding to the other, while at the same time speaking with its own voice. And this is what he means by adaptive transformation to the world, a continuous process of change through reciprocal responsiveness. He uses the example, the metaphor of two tuning forks to illustrate resonant relationships. When placed in close proximity, the vibration of one tuning fork prompts the other to vibrate at its own frequency. Each then speaks with its own voice. Moreover, the vibrations of the two forks can mutually reinforce each other, their amplitudes growing ever larger. The tuning fork metaphor is interesting from the point of view of my own idea of freedom as ecologically attuned, ethically self-determination. Certainly, Rosa and I share a critical gaze on instrumentalizing and controlling agency. The difference, as I'll now point out, is that Rosa vehemently rejects any attempt to conceptualize freedom in terms of autonomy or self-determination. For Rosa, the interactive aspect of the tuning fork metaphor is crucial. He observes correctly that being in the world is always relational. He agrees with authors who emphasize that even alienation is a state in which subjects have relationships. The point is that the alienated subjects come to see these relationships as meaningless, becoming indifferent to them or even repulsed by them. As he puts it, alienated subjects encounter a mute world, a silent world, a world that does not sing back to them, a world bereft of qualities. In their state of alienation, the only kinds of relationships to the world available to them are either withdrawal from or instrumentalizing control over the segment of the world in question. However, I want to say that Rosa jumps too hastily from correct affirmation of the relationality of agency to rejection of any attempt to conceptualize freedom as self-determination, as autonomy in some kind of Kantian sense. He argues that the non-relational character of the concept of autonomy makes it unsuitable for defining resonant subjectivity, insisting that non-relationality is part of the very concept of autonomy. Autonomy requires the self, the autos, to be governed by a law, by nomos. Rosa's critical observations on the concept of autonomy reiterate worries about autonomy's connotations of self-ownership and self-sufficiency that have been articulated in various ways since Kant. Reinforced by Nietzsche's and Foucault's suspicion of autonomy as a normative ideal, these objections were picked up and developed by multiple communitarian, feminist, and post-structuralist critics in the 1980s and 90s. Furthermore, in common with early Frankfurt School critical theorists, in particular Horkheimer and Adorno in Dialectic of Enlightenment, Rosa emphasizes the connection between autonomous agency and capitalism. For one thing, he shares Horkheimer and Adorno's view that a self-determining subject is a functional prerequisite for the institutions of capitalist modernity. For another, he agrees with them that the principle of self-determination supports the logic of capitalist competition. He also affirms their thesis that modernity's valorization of autonomy has gone hand in hand with a picture of atomized, relationless subjects defined by an instrumentalizing relationship to the world, which is the basis for a capitalist economy of technological and scientific rationality. This leads Rosa to endorse Adorno and Horkheimer's gloomy prognosis that modernity's pursuit of autonomy could lead to the annihilation of the societal conditions for a well-lived life. A further, in his view, even more important reason to reject any conceptualization of freedom as autonomy or self-determination is that he sees the idea of self-determination as closely associated with self-control. he advocates instead a conception of non-alienated subjectivity as I told you, resonant, self-efficacious subjectivity, in which self-control is not an integral component. His intuition here is that, as he puts it, people frequently feel the least alienated or the most with themselves precisely when they lose control over themselves, their lives, or their circumstances. And this is why Rosa favors instead a concept of freedom not as control, but as resonant self-efficacy. By this, he means an influence. It's hard to use clear English terms, but he means, in German, the word is Einwirken, to use a process and response-oriented relationship to the world that's constituently reliant on that which remains ever inaccessible. I say that again. Self-efficacious subjectivity for Rosa calls for a process and response-oriented relationship to the world that is constitutively reliant on that which remains forever inaccessible, which cannot be mastered, which resists, which cannot be controlled. And the core idea here is that the overall quality of human relationships to the world is ultimately determined by the ability of subjects to reach the world through their own actions and to cause it to speak. Rosa is confident that the concept of resonant self-efficacy fully captures the meaning of freedom in the sense of a non-alienated, resonant relationship to the world, while avoiding the unwelcome connotations of the concepts of autonomy or self-determination and other competitors such as authenticity or integrity. But I do not agree with Rosa that freedom should be re-envisioned as resonant self-efficacy. Politically, his rejection of the idea of self-determination and the sidelining of critical reflection that results from this rejection has quietist implications. More specifically, it inhibits critique of certain kinds of power. An example here is authoritarianism, a power relationship that has generally been seen as detrimental to freedom within the broad tradition of critical social theory. In the absence of critical reflection as an integral element of freedom, Rosa's self-efficacious subjects have no freedom-related motivation to interrogate and challenge authoritarian power, and no normative basis for doing so. Let me explain. Political authoritarianism is closely connected with what I call epistemological and ethical authoritarianism. Epistemological authoritarianism is a mode of authority based on a claim always to know best what's factually or normatively correct. Its power resides in this superior knowledge, which typically rests on a claim to privileged access to truth. In consequence, authoritarian authorities' claim to knowledge cannot be challenged by those concerned. For example, teachers are epistemologically authoritarian when they assert the unquestionable truth of the information or theories they teach to their students. Religious leaders are epistemologically authoritarian when they claim unquestionable knowledge of the truth of the holy texts on which they base their teachings. Politicians are epistemologically authoritarian when they proclaim the truth of particular opinions and judgments while disallowing public contestation of their validity. Ethical authoritarianism is closely related to this. It's a mode of authority based on a claim to insight into what's good in an ethical sense that cannot be challenged rationally by those over whom it's exercised. For example, teachers are ethically authoritarian when they assert the unquestionable validity of the school rules, policies, and other prescriptions that are supposed to help their students to lead an ethically good life. Religious leaders are ethically authoritarian when they require their congregations unquestioningly to observe ethical prescriptions issued by religious hierarchies. But politicians are ethically authoritarian when they support and implement laws, ordinances, and public policies, but disallow public contestation of their validity, at least of the validity of their content. Authoritarian authority is hostile to strongly evaluation agency, as I've interpreted, because it compels its subjects to accept unquestionably certain ways of thinking and acting, disallowing the kind of critical reflection that is a condition of their strong evaluation of their self-determining freedom. But by contrast, its authoritarianism is not evidently hostile to self-efficacious agency as construed by Rosa. Indeed, authoritarian regimes may be particularly well equipped to provide the material basis that Rosa rightly considers necessary for the development of free agency. By material basis, he means, for example, technological and economic efficiency, which makes it possible to cure diseases and overcome material shortages, thereby creating the social conditions necessary to dream of resonant relationships to the world for everybody. But as a matter of empirical fact, authoritarian regimes may be better able than non-authoritarian ones to ensure the required material basis for everyone. Thus, not only do self-efficacious subjects have no normative basis for rejecting authoritarianism, they might well have good reasons for embracing it. I see two paths as open to Rosa here. One is simply to shrug his shoulders and accept authoritarianism as a prerequisite in certain cases of freedom. The other, which is the one I pursue, the other is to re-articulate his idea of resonant self-efficacious subjectivity as a mode of agency in which self-determination is an integral element, and to use this as the basis for a critique of non-authoritarian, for a critique of authoritarian authority. And this is the path I pursue. So I don't know how long I've been talking. I have another shortish section. Is that okay? Or what time is it?
Yes, sure. There's time. Yeah.
Okay, good. So this is my final section where I talk about a different recent model of agency. As I mentioned at the beginning, I posit self-transformation alongside self-determination as an integral moment of freedom. My claim is that without a self-transforming component, freedom could not be construed as socially or potentially socially transformative, for due to internalized patterns of thought and behavior, even critically engaged self-determining human agency might simply reproduce the societally prevailing patterns. Self-transformation is tied to societal transformation, social transformation, for a further reason. In the context of the Anthropocene, there's a strong likelihood that fundamental self-transformation will be necessary in order to make concrete, to actualize the proposed re-envisioning of human agency, in order to make it part of habitual behavior and everyday social practices on an individual and collective level. This is in turn, in my view, necessary, making it part of everyday social practices and habitual behavior. It would be necessary to arrest humanity's currently environmentally disastrous trajectory, and in order to develop new forms of living together on the planet Earth that place humans and non-humans on an ethically equal footing. In a new project I'm currently developing, I address the question of self-transformation through exploration of aesthetics. However, rather than adopting a Kantian interpretation of aesthetics as appreciation of beauty, I seek to retrieve and re-articulate the ancient Greek understanding of aesthesis as responsiveness to stimulation of the senses, as a kind of sensibility. More precisely, I take aesthesis to mean perceptual change through disclosure. By this, I mean transformation of perceptions by opening new spaces of the imagination. That's what I mean by aesthetics. Transformation of perception by opening new spaces of the imagination. I use this re-articulated idea of aesthesis to expand our understanding of aesthetics and to allow us to see the aesthetically transformative potentials of a wide range of individual and collective experiences. These include experiences within experimental or peripheral life practices, experiences generated through collective political action, and experiences enabled by critically engaged social and political theorizing itself. I contend here in this regard, I contend that like many artworks and art practices in a narrower sense, these experimental life practices, social and political theorizing, collective action, they too have an aesthetic potential or an aesthetic dimension containing potential for transforming self-understandings and corresponding modes of behavior and social practice in ways that would foster receptivity to my proposed envisioning of freedom. In the case of artworks and art practices in the narrower sense, I draw attention to certain contemporary works that create spaces for experiencing and imagining new kinds of relationality. By doing so, they strengthen motivation for ecologically attuned societal change and increase possibilities for making such change a reality globally. And I give some examples. I mean, this is work in progress of the Dutch designer Helle Jongerius, who critically explores the relations between humans and their natural and material environments, highlighting the agency of both artifacts and natural objects. Or again, the work of the British-German-Indian artist Tino Sehgal, whose work abandons material production in favor of lived experiences. A third example I give is the work of the artist and filmmaker John Akomfrah. To give an example of his work, his immersive 6-channel video installation, Purple, explores the effects of climate change across the planet and on human communities, biodiversity, and the wilderness through a series of interwoven moments conveying the complex and fragile interrelations of human and non-human life. So that's just some examples. Now, so in order to make this a little bit more philosophically concrete, this self-transforming component of freedom, I will, in my final section, I will contrast my proposed re-envisioning of freedom, self-transformation, with and self-determination, with a recent imagining of freedom that, like Rosa's, may initially seem very close to my own concern. And as mentioned, this is the idea of agency imagined by my colleague Brian O'Connor in his book Idleness. Like Rosa's, O'Connor's conception is particularly interesting from the point of view of my own idea of freedom, since at first glance it could be described as ecologically attuned. As in the case of Rosa, O'Connor and I share a critical gaze on instrumentalizing and controlling agency. However, I argue that O'Connor's perspective is not, in fact, ecologically attuned. Moreover, like Rosa's, it lacks a robust political dimension. In O'Connor's case, this is because it rejects the value of self-transformation and, by extension, societal transformation. O'Connor offers a defense of idleness that is at once a critique of the negative perceptions of idleness found in the writings of many modern philosophers and a positive vision of a form of freedom. Against the widespread philosophical view that a life of idleness is a debased form of life, he presents idleness as a bolder image of freedom. In contrast with Rosa, it's noteworthy that he characterizes idleness as a form of self-direction. Idleness for O'Connor is not a life of mere impulse. This means in turn that it's not mindless. It contains conceptual components and judgments. He writes, quote, "As we idle, we know what we're doing, even if we have no idea of an overall end or purpose in what we do. This lack of overall end or purpose explains why idleness has no connection with an ethics of any kind, for it implies a profound indifference to the good of others, human and non-human. Nonetheless, idleness can be said to have an ethical dimension in that a life of idleness inevitably has a sense for the idler that such a life is a good life." Describing O'Connor's idea of idleness as a positive vision of freedom may be misleading. He himself emphasizes the oppositional nature both of his account of idleness and of idleness itself as a form of freedom. As a form of freedom, idleness is oppositional in the sense that it opposes prevailing social conventions and resists the norms and conventions of capitalist societies like ours. To be sure, the resistance offered by idleness is implicit. In O'Connor's account, also worth noting, its rebellion isn't against each and every kind of norm and convention, but it's more specific. It's a defiance of the norms and conventions of modern capitalist societies. Idleness resists the expectations incorporated in the institutions and practices of such societies. Above all, that social status is to be acquired through productivity and performance, through hard work, discipline, self-improvement, and self-control. In this respect, there's a clear affinity between his imagining of freedom, mine, and Rosa's. Motivating all three of us is a rejection of freedom as sovereign power over self and others, together with the attitude of self-mastery and control that this modern ideal expresses. Put differently, both O'Connor and I re-envision human freedom as a mode of self-direction, and also Rosa, that is non-instrumental. Yet another point of connection, and we of course also both emphasize self-direction. Yet another point of connection is that we both attribute an ethical dimension to freedom in the sense that we tie it to a sense of the good. However, we part ways in how we unpack this sense of the good. In O'Connor's case, it means only that a life of idleness is experienced as, by the individual in question, is experienced as and held to be a good life. Freedom as idleness rules out, as I said, any concern for the good of others, human or non-human. This means that it's in turn that it is essentially indifferent to the question of whether others lead a good life. Indeed, even to the question of whether they should lead a life of idleness. And this is why O'Connor is, I think, correct to say that it has no connection with ethics, even in a broad sense. But a troubling implication of this, from the point of view of the contemporary ecological disaster, is that freedom as idleness is essentially indifferent to the good of human and non-human others. And for this reason, despite its non-instrumentality, it is not what I call ecologically attuned. Nor is it robustly political, in the sense of motivated by concern for the quality of societal arrangements and possibilities for change for the better. Put differently, it lacks the transformative element that I build into freedom. O'Connor, in fact, emphasizes that freedom as idleness is a fundamentally non-developmental perspective on agency. Idleness, as he sees it, is antithetical to any kind of necessity, including higher necessities, such as self-realization. This explains why it's a form of agency that's completely indifferent towards what we ought to make of ourselves. Also, why it resists the view that our lives should take on a certain shape or clear purpose. Ultimately, it explains why freedom as idleness is fundamentally incompatible with a desire to change oneself for the better. And this means, in turn, evidently, that it's profoundly hostile to Taylor's idea of the modern self as a strong evaluator. In consequence, though this isn't something that O'Connor himself points out, freedom as idleness is fundamentally incompatible with a desire to change society for the better. Thus, while freedom as idleness is a rebellious mode of freedom, and in this sense politically motivated, I reject it as a re-envisioning of freedom appropriate for humans in the Anthropocene. Let me conclude with 2 or 3 words. Across the humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences, there's a widespread consensus that human activity, intensified by the rapid development of capitalist industrialization, has been a major factor in the contemporary global ecological disaster. There are strong reasons to think that human understandings of their own agency, especially in the course of Western modernity, have played a significant role in this. The understandings in question are undergirded by the conviction that humans are ethically superior to non-human entities, which are primarily objects for manipulation and control. In political theorizing, the predominant conceptions of freedom in terms of individual choice and decision have expressed and reinforced this conviction and continue to do so. I seek to develop a new, fundamentally different framework for contemporary political theorizing that would call for a new democratic politics with new kinds of democratic institutions. And this demands, in turn, a fundamentally re-envisioning of human freedom. As you will have heard, I propose a distinctive ethical, aesthetic, political interpretation of freedom. It's ethical in the general sense that I tie self-determining human agency to concern for the good, and in the more specific sense that it entails a specific ethical perspective, and I specify this specific ethical perspective as a concern for the good of humans and non-humans who are placed ethically on an equal footing. So it's an ecologically attuned concern for the good. My re-envisioning of freedom is also aesthetic, favoring an interpretation of aesthesis as perceptual change through disclosure. Furthermore, though I didn't go into it in my talk today, I emphasize the imbrication, the interwovenness of self-transformation and societal transformation. I mentioned it, I didn't go into it. My overall intention is political. I offer a re-envisioning of human freedom with the aim of motivating humans globally to adopt modes of thinking and action that are more ecologically attuned and corresponding democratic institutions and practices, rendering humanity better equipped to address the manifold uncertainties and challenges presented by the Anthropocene. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Cooke, for this great, all-encompassing talk. I believe, would you like to give like a 3 to 5 minutes break?
That would be great. Thank you. Yeah, just I think Zoom is very tiring for everybody, and I'm willing to stay on as long as anybody has time for discussion. So it'll probably be good just to move away from the screen for a minute or two. So I'll stop my video and I'll be my microphone. I'll be back soon.
Okay. Okay. Great.
Let me see.
Çağdaş, I think we can now move on to questions.
Feel free to ask me to clarify points. I mean, there was a lot in my paper, it was very dense. I did try to repeat myself, but I'm sure there are things that are really still quite unclear. So feel free just to ask on that level or whatever.
Sure.
Me? Okay, sure.
You're mute.
May I?
Yeah. I see Mehmet Ali Güzelgün raised his hand, so we can have his question. Yes.
Thank you. So thank you, first of all. Disclaimer, I'm not a philosopher. So I was really trying to follow the many arguments, and this is a very simple clarification question. I am more interested in hearing the distinction between the work of Rosa and the framework that you, Maeve, are mounting here. From what I understand, if I ask this question, maybe it will enable you to talk a little bit more on the difference. From what I understand, whereas we could see Rosa extending, let's say, the social dimension, the ethical dimension, and political dimension to non-humans, from what I understand, you seem to extend the ethical dimension to non-humans without extending the social and political in a way that involves non-humans. Did I understand it right? Could it be said? And if this is an accusation, what would be your response? Thank you.
Can I respond? Thank you. Nice to see you, Mali. So that's maybe I don't think that's quite what I was saying, but I'm trying to grapple with the question. Maybe you're right in a certain sense. I mean, in a nutshell, I mean, in the simplest terms, the main difference between my account of agency, my re-envisioning of agency, and Rosa's has to do with the moment of self-determination or self-direction. So otherwise, we actually see things in very similar fashion. I say, I like the idea of resonance, for instance. I like his metaphor of the tuning forks, which he develops at some length. There's a lot of very important things in his account, in his reimagining of agency. But I think from a political point of view, and I think politics is a human activity. So this is politically, and particularly a critical politics that's concerned to change society for the better, because that's what we need in our current situation of ecological disaster. We always need it, but we need it really urgently. That in order to empower people to see, to act in ways that could help to bring about fundamental social change, people need to think of themselves, this is my claim, as agents capable of shaping their own future, that we collectively and individually can contribute to shaping our own futures. We're not exclusive, we're only responsible, or let's say, we're always involved in relationships, so it's not a matter of individual action or individual responsibility, but individual action can make a difference. And I don't see that there's any room for that. Well, there is room for it in Rose's account, but you can have what he calls self-efficacious subjectivity, so his form of agency, his resonant agency, without any political motivation or without any, and in fact, it's readily compatible with feelings of powerlessness, loss of control. He wouldn't see that as good, but he doesn't tell us why it's not good, because powerlessness is actually good in his account. So I think, I mean, these are two separate points. One is, I think we have to think of ourselves as critically evaluating. That's also the other thing, critically evaluating self-determining subjects. So the critical evaluation part gets lost from his, that's one thing. Sorry, yeah, I wasn't quite clear, gets lost from his account. And the other is that it's a separate argument, but it may, his slant or his vision of agency as resonant agency is perfectly compatible with widespread feelings of powerlessness. I think that is a big political and social problem at the moment, because it gives rise to, desperate responses like belligerence, or violence, or else just apathy or resignation or despair. So I think it's not productive at this moment in time to give up on the idea of freedom and as self-direction, and he I think does. What I said in the paper, though, was more along the lines of he doesn't pay enough attention to critical evaluation and self-determination, critically evaluating self-determination, which means that his position, his vision of agency is compatible with certain forms of authoritarian power. And in fact, you could even say authoritarian power is very conducive to establishing the social and political conditions of material well-being that we need for resonant subjectivity. His account doesn't offer any criteria or grounds for rejecting authoritarianism or for rejecting powerlessness. Those are my two objections. Thank you. Thank you for your question.
Yes, we can move on to Önder Küçükkural. Can we have your question?
Thank you very much, Maeve. It was a great talk. Yeah, my question is more about this critical evaluation, the subjects, this capability of this critical evaluation. I know you are not happy with Habermas'in discourse ethics in general, and it's not only in the domain of cognitive, but it's a clarification question, actually. At the end of your talk, you start talking about aesthetic judgments or different kind of human faculties other than reasoning, but you also talked about reasoning as we know it, how do you say, logical, analytical kind of reasoning on the one side, and on the other side, there are other kinds of human faculties. What kind of self-transformation are you talking about? And on the one side, you're talking about this critical reflectivity and all these things that we should add to Rosa, but I didn't really get where you are Like, should we start doing meditation or that kind of self-transformation are you talking about? Or are we still in the discourse ethics, like following Habermasian and all that line of thought? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really helpful. Thanks. I'm just nice to see you as well. So it's a very helpful question. Perhaps also would show that my position isn't completely well worked out. But in my account, my proposed account, freedom, this mode of agency I'm proposing, is a matter of aesthetic self-transformation and critical reflection. The two are completely compatible with each other, but they're on different levels, if you like, because I am saying that critical evaluation, it doesn't always, but particularly at the moment, critical evaluation on its own is always potentially insufficient, because we can be very critical, but we might be trapped in certain ways of thinking and acting that we're not even conscious of, and that just perpetuate destructive, pernicious forms of behavior. I think that's true on a global level, for some cultures more than others at the moment, but for some people more than others. So it's, if you like, the old critique of ideology. We need to overcome our own false consciousness, but it's not just consciousness, it's behavior, social practices, and so on. And that's why transformation, self-transformation, work on the self, if you like, is often necessary. It's not necessary for critical evaluation, because we might be born with this super sense that allows us always to see when we're deceiving ourselves or manipulating ourselves. But for most people, we delude ourselves. We are trapped by ways of thinking and behavior. So that's why we need self-transformation. But self-transformation, in no way, it's not just, I'm not replacing critical evaluation with aesthetic, judgment. In fact, you're quite right to mention the name Habermas. I'm actually combining it with a quite Habermasian view of critical evaluation through dialogue with others. Just that I'm trying to expand Habermas's model of public deliberation to pay more attention to what will make public deliberation effective. But I'm also agreeing with Habermas that that we need public exchange of reasons. But reasons have to be aesthetic, in the sense that they have to open our eyes, in this sense of open our eyes. And reasons can do that. Reasons drawn on life experiences, reasons drawn on from momentary encounters. There's all sorts of reasons that we have for taking the for putting forward the arguments we do, and we need different kinds of reasons, and that's where the aesthetic transformation comes in. And what I'm trying to do is say aesthetic transformation isn't just a question of going to an art gallery or engaging in street art or something like this, but there's all sorts of ways. Simply living in a certain way. So it could be meditation, but for some people that isn't the right way. It could be kayaking. It could be collective action. It could be a religious experience in the wilderness or something like this. So I'm leaving that completely open. I'm just saying there are many ways. I actually think theories themselves sometimes can have or philosophy has a aesthetic power. We read something, we think, oh, and I know people, or arguments can have them. I know people thinking of, Quentin Skinner actually told me in conversation, he became a vegetarian in 1996, himself and his wife, listening to a talk at Harvard. So the pure force of argument, if it can resonate with people and make them change, but it doesn't always. Often it needs to be anchored in real life experiences. And I think usually there are multiple factors that make us change our views. So things, and we have to be attentive and alert to all of them and mobilize all these transformative factors at the moment.
Thank you. Karim Hocam?
Thank you again, Maeve. And so I have a few ideas. I think they are connected, so I'm gonna just see how it goes. So, so what if, so in some sense, so what if, and I think it is true, that the capitalist modes of living have significantly, and maybe even completely infiltrated and hijacked to a great extent, our ability for critical reflection. And, it's just, you kind of already mentioned this now in answering to that. And yes, okay.
You're freezing a little bit.
Of us do have tastes of these in various moments of their life, but at the same time, this might be nothing more than interrupted breaths of fresh air, right? I mean, nothing more than a little bit of nice idea here, a little bit of new imagination there, and which seems to me falls very short for the sort of challenge or the task at hand, which requires, in your words, I mean, you put it at the beginning in terms of a non-hierarchical dwelling of humans and non-humans, which presupposes that maybe our entire social and political organization has to be revamped or significantly transformed, right? So this is one part, right? And at this point, I mean, someone like Aristotle comes to mind. I mean, one of the nice, for me at least, nice things in Aristotle is like, this idea that individuals who seek happiness, right, won't get happiness, right? Happiness is a byproduct, right? It's a byproduct of being in a certain way, leading a virtuous life. Happiness comes. So what if, I mean, from that perspective, it might be that in order to achieve the aim, right, the aim of non-hierarchical dwelling, it might be that developing different modes of being is the way to go about it. And these modes of being, they don't necessarily have to be aware of the aim itself. And this is, I think this is, maybe someone like Rosa might take this line of argument, say, listen, we just have to learn how to become more resonant. And as a result, as a byproduct, somehow the politics will change. But if we really, and maybe the quietism, given the way the context is with ecology and capitalism, maybe the political quietist features of Rosa might, in some twisted way, turn out to be good for politics. For politics. Yeah. Something
can I answer that?
Yeah. So,
I mean, I know you have other questions, but that's a very
this is it.
That's a great question, and it enables me to say something about an aspect of my project that I have that I didn't mention at all. So I suppose your question ultimately is, the essence of your question is, how is this change, going to be possible? And I can't you can't form any picture of what's going on. And surely what we need to do is lead a different kind of life. And then in the first instance, it's less important whether this is a life of what I call freedom or not. The main thing is to live fundamentally differently. So and quietism might be, in fact, the best attitude towards the world, given the all-encroaching nature of capitalism. So withdrawal, or just not, trying to live this life of meditation, or as Unda said, or whatever, might be better, or kayaking life, or whatever, my example, or whatever. So yeah, I mean, these are strong points. I'm resistant because I agree with you that it is about leading different kinds of life. Two things I want to say. First of all, I don't think any political social theory can do any more than issue a forceful, powerful invitation to people to think differently. And that's a very small contribution in the scheme of things. So it's only one way of getting people to change their lives. So we need all sorts of other ways. I said that already. But it's not just a question of change. This is the second point, and I'll develop this a little bit. An action. We need change, and we need action, in my view. Not quite, we need action, because otherwise change isn't going to happen fast enough. The situation is desperate. Change. I've kind of lost my thread, but I think I was going to say, yeah, no, change must be of the right kind. That's the first part of my second point. It has to be the right kind of change. So what I'm doing on the level of philosophy or theory is simply is issuing an invitation with a picture of the kind of change, the direction in which we should be moving, and I'm trying to offer a philosophical vocabulary that would allow us to articulate that picture. So it's an invitation with a picture and a vocabulary. But this, as you correctly say, you know, this may change nothing, but I think it's indispensable that we have the right picture and the right change. And one reason, let me give an example of why I think it's so important, is that even at the moment, where there's a huge amount of literature on how to on new ways of relating to nature, politically, socially, very new, very interesting work on rights, for example, you know, giving rights to rivers and stones, boulders and mountains. And, you know, I think this is really exciting. But what has struck me in all my reading, which so far I'm only dipping into it, is that these call for giving rights to rivers or mountains and boulders, which I'm in favor of, at least provisionally, they simply reproduce the idea of the love of the legal subject, the subject of rights, as a subject that is free to decide and choose more or less as it wishes. So the boulder or the river, or the mountain is now, we attribute to the mountain that kind of freedom. I think that is disastrous. We need to change our whole picture of what agency is. So that's why I think it's so important to get the right picture, the right vocabulary. But, and this is what I hadn't mentioned in my talk, and this is really important, so thank you for allowing me to say it. At least I didn't go into any detail. Laws are very important. You know, I think we need the guidance. Laws and other forms of authority, political, legal authority, can help us to move in the right direction. So we might need, you know, what some people call nudges. I don't really like that word, but nudges by policies, by laws. I think we have to rethink the idea of laws as just regulating and controlling. They also have this orienting, guiding, enabling a function. I see laws, good laws, as being in the service of freedom, not as threatening and controlling freedom. And we need to think of laws in this way, and we need the right laws. And I think, you know, at the moment, but even that can only go so far. You can only win, you can only change, you can only win, change hearts and minds, which is what we need to do. If we win hearts and minds, and any law, no matter how good, any theory, no matter how convincing, has to connect up with, has to resonate with impulses and feelings that are already there. And this is another reason why I talk about aesthetic self-transformation, because aesthetic speaks to affects and feelings as well as the mind. That's kind of an answer to under as well. So I think it goes easily hand in hand. We're thinking beings, we're feeling beings, but it does draw attention to the affective, emotional, feeling dimension of transformation. So that will be enough now, but I'm saying laws and so on are very important too, and good policies, and pull out all the stops.
Thank you. Erdal Hocam.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Cooke. Yeah, it is so rich and stimulating presentation, and the issue is I'm not sure whether I can organize my question very well or not, but let me try. Yeah, my question is a little bit related to the Kerim's question. you emphasize especially the idea that all entities are and related to this idea, you see, you argued that we should search for good for every entity. So my question is about these two ideas. When we say, we should try to find good for every entity, you mean we, at the center of this search, still there is human being. So, I mean, we as a human being judge whether any good thing is good for every entity or not, right?
Yes.
So, I think if this is the case for you, I mean, here I want to refer to Heideggerian conception about especially Western thinking. Here, he said, as you know, Western thinking, in the Western thinking, this thinking started with especially Plato and Aristotle, according to Heidegger. He argued that this philosopher put the human being at the center of all entities. And when we come forward in modern time, Descartes reformulate this idea in very extreme version. So he means this philosopher define human being by referring to rationality. So by using reason, we put a place for each entity. Because of that, when we judge all these entities, we judge, based on the rationality. So I think before thinking and reasoning the freedom, I think we should re-envisioning human being. If we still put human being at the center of our in the judgment, when we try to find good things for every entity, still I think we have the same problem. So because of that, I think we should thinking about human being. What is human being? For Heidegger, for instance, when we define human being, we are not obliged to refer to the rationality. So what do you mean by this idea? I mean, all entities are ethically equal and we should search for good for every entity. Still, we are at the center of this idea, or you have a different idea about the place of human being in the world.
Thank you. That's a really central question. At the beginning, I couldn't acoustically hear everything because you were breaking up, but I think I understood everything you were saying, and I think they're really important, pertinent questions. So certainly, agency. I'm talking about freedom as a specific form of agency, but my concern is agency. Your question is about the human centeredness of this conception of agency. I'm calling for ecologically attuned agency that is, that sees every entity, human and non-human, as a source or depository, perhaps, to the different metaphor of the good. What does that mean, and how is that even possible? So I think I'm only really beginning to develop my thinking here, but I have, even as my thinking has developed over the last 2 years, it seems to me that we need a much more differentiated concept of anthropocentrism. So there are many forms of human-centeredness. One I made a few years ago was between the way in which we access our knowledge of the world, that's always, and value, that's always through a human lens. So our judgments of value, our judgments of what's rational and irrational are epistemologically anthropocentric. But I wanted to say that doesn't mean that we have to give more weight ethically to human interests and concerns. And that's what I mean by this more ecologically attuned perspective. What that actually means, I have to leave. I think that's contextual, because ethics, what ethics requires us to do in any particular situation or context depends on the circumstances. So, individually, collectively, globally. So an ecologically attuned perspective does say, even the coronavirus has a potential good that's independent of human concerns, or a mosquito, or or a mountain, or whatever. But that perspective, that way of doesn't have any, as yet, very specific implications for how we act towards the coronavirus, or towards a mosquito, or towards an animal, or towards a mountain. So I don't even think that being ecologically attuned, and this ethically non-hierarchical way, means that we should not, that we should become vegetarian. But I do think it means we have to relate to animals in a different way. It doesn't mean we shouldn't develop vaccines against the coronavirus, but it probably means we would develop different kinds of vaccines and see ourselves when we're developing the vaccines in a different way. So I think it changes our attitude. It brings a kind of self-reflexivity into our human-centeredness, and that might be entirely in line with what Heidegger envisages. I don't know. I don't want to. I think a certain human-centeredness is absolutely unavoidable, simply because we have, as humans, we have human-specific interests and concerns, not because we're superior due to our rationality, but because we have concerns. We have to, we have to survive. We want to flourish. We have our own interests and concerns, but we have to think whether they're good. The ones we have to think whether our interpretations as humans of our interests and concerns are the right ones. And for that, we have to expand our gaze to encompass all other entities. That's not very well worked out, but that's my intuition. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yeah. But I think I should add something to my explanation about Heideggerian idea. Yeah, sure. Human being is at the center of these these things. But do we think human being as an isolated subject? This is the I think big idea for Heidegger. I mean, when we put the human being at the center of all this issue, we should consider human being as isolated subject from other things, and then we should think about the other things, and then we should search for good things for all entities, or from other things we should come to us, and we should consider us in the relation with the other things.
I'm saying that both. I didn't mean to say that. And I said it in my presentation. that I think Heidegger could be right about this, but certainly what I'm saying is this ecologically attuned perspective demands or requires attention to the specific qualities or features of each object, but also to the interconnectedness of all specific entities. So specificity and relationality are combined in this perspective, but one without the other leads to different dangers, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, we can move on to another question. I see the username has a Kadir Has University address. I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Yes, sorry about that. Yeah, I was using my work address, work Zoom account. It's Terence Holden. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Right. Right, yeah. No, thank you very much, Professor Cooke. It's a very interesting talk, and thank you to the organizers for allowing me to tune into this. So my question, well, it's quite simple, I suppose. Basically, I just wanted to question further into this, as you mentioned, ecologically attuned concept of agency or I suppose interaction. And I wanted to just basically ask you whether whether you have a specific concept of nature as objective correlates accompanying this concept of interaction, or I suppose more accurately as sort of this dialogue, nature as a kind of dialogical interlocutor accompanying this concept of interaction. If you have a concept, or if you believe that we need one. I mean, I ask this because when I was listening to you speak, I mean, your theory reminded me of in particular when you were introducing aesthetics and perception. It reminded me a little bit, I mean, of sort of eco-modernism. I mean, only a little bit, because in many respects, it's also very different what you're proposing. Specifically, what I mean is that, what you're doing is you're encouraging sort of new forms of sensibility and interaction with nature. And, you know, so in eco-modernism, we have the same idea, you know, of the need for sort of new forms of interacting with nature, new forms of sensibility, you know. In particular, nature as not being separate from human society, but as being around us in our urban landscape. Often this nature exists, but we simply overlook it. So we need a sort of new way of seeing nature and interacting nature, even within our urban landscapes. That's an eco-modernist idea. However, in eco-modernism, I suppose the challenge is that this idea of interaction or aesthetic transformation is accompanied by a new concept of nature. You know, it's this idea that we have to, in eco-modernism, we have to abandon the kind of traditional romantic idea of wild nature. In particular, in the Anthropocene, this idea of nature is dead. You know, this idea of an untouched wild nature, and so from that perspective, you know, this some parallel way transformed idea of interaction is accompanied by, in a sense, also abandoning the notion to some extent that nature has its own intrinsic value. Abandoning to some extent a kind of a biocentric or indeed ecocentric perspective on nature. Just to qualify my question. So basically, to reframe that, so does your idea of ecologically attuned freedom or agency or interaction, does it come, and re-envisaged idea of aesthetics, does it come to a similar, does it come with a similar concept of nature or a rival concept of nature?
Thank you. That's really a challenging question, and one of my difficulties in answering it is that it's clear from what you were saying that eco-modernism has moved on in the last 10 to 15 years, and I'm not au fait with the most recent contributions. I always had a bit of an unease with this dispensing with the very concept of nature, in that I think it fosters this human-centered attitude of human manipulation or control that I see as having contributed to the contemporary disaster, but maybe it doesn't have to. So do I have a concept? Maybe so. I'm willing to say no. There are strands within eco-modernism that are really closely aligned to what I'm trying to do. Maybe if I'm trying to put my finger on my unease, it had to do with the lack of attentiveness to specificity, to distinctiveness, and it doesn't have to be attention or attentiveness to the specificity of so-called natural objects. It can also be of material objects. So when I was talking about aesthetic, I give my examples of artists whose work I find interesting. This Dutch designer Hella Jongerius, I was at an exhibition in Berlin. It's just anecdotal, really, and she really, and other visual artists, sculptors, they encourage you to look at material objects in different ways, artifacts, not just stones and boulders that are part of nature, but artifacts. And I think that's important, but I would still want to say, I would say they have a specificity that distinguishes, a mobile phone is an artifact. We have relationships that are important for good, better, or worse with our mobile phones, if we have one. But the specificity of a mobile phone is quite different to the specificity of the daffodil that grows in my garden. I'm not saying one is better than the other, or we should be attentive to one rather than the other, but we have to say there are qualitative differences, and we have to engage critically, in my view, with what's good and bad for us as humans about all these. Let's say a daffodil is probably just nice, but a mosquito or the coronavirus, which are natural entities, and say a mobile phone, which is not. But I'm certainly this is if you like this is terrain I'm only beginning to move on to. But I certainly wouldn't want to say from the beginning I'm only concerned with relationships to natural entities and natural objects, and I would resist any overly sharp or defined conception of what nature is. So that's the two things. So encompassing a view of entities, and then not just not nature in the case of natural entities in any very narrow sense.
Great, thank you.
For your question.
Okay, moving on to that, and it's Ritz.
Thank you, Professor Cooke. Very nice to hear you. It's been a long time since Istanbul. So I was wondering, how do you envision the connection between the individual transformation and the societal transformation? Because I know that you said that you weren't focusing on this part during this presentation, but I was really curious about it, because it really made me think of how can we save agency in the Anthropocene without putting all the responsibility onto the individual? So how do we conceptualize this relationship without sounding like we are really approving of the Exxon report?
Yeah, very good. I mean, unfortunately, my answer would be on quite a general level, but I think both. There are two big dangers. One is that I make everything the responsibility of the individual, and the other, everything is the responsibility of the state. And I was trying to avoid the second one by, or whatever, or politics, global politics or something. So agencies, political agencies. So I was trying to avoid the first one by emphasizing self-transformation, because I think there is a tendency to say, this is not, the problem is so big, and it's that no changes on the level of behavior are going to make any difference. And I think that is actually, as a matter of empirical fact, it's probably true. So there are many studies that show that even if we all stopped flying in planes and even jet planes, it would have a minimal impact on the ecological disaster. If we all stopped eating meat, it would might have a tiny impact, but in the scheme of things. So certainly it's not it's not just a question of individual change. Nonetheless, I want to say that in order for the right kind of change to happen, we need to develop an idea, a picture of what we think this change should be. And that's why we have to ourselves, we have to be persuaded or convinced by this picture. And we have to, it has to anchor itself in an affective way in our everyday thought and behavior. So, so the self-transformation element is indispensable. Quite apart from anything, I think it also means, no freedom and whatever, and I have other reasons for not wanting it. But as I said, in response to Karim, I think there's a very important place for good policies, good laws. We should also, as individuals, work collectively to make sure that we have people in power who help to design and implement the right kinds of policies and laws. So, and good laws can change selves as well. So we, as individual selves, can help to make good laws and good policies through political action, individually and mainly collectively, to agitation, to protest, and so on. But good laws can actually change behavior. So a good law can I think it, trivial examples, but they're important in my view. Laws on garbage disposal, laws on the use of plastics. I have seen in Ireland, which was not at all ecologically attuned 20 years ago, I have seen how actual laws, or the no smoking ban, actually change people's ways of relating to themselves, to others, and to the environment. So I do think, I think the two have to go hand in hand. Self-transformation and societal transformation. Selves can change, must change societies. Societies can change and must change selves.
So if I understand you correctly, basically you're saying the connection would be the law. That's what is going to tie the change that is happening, is going to happen at the political level and at the individual level.
I'm saying political change without change at the individual level won't be effective. And we need, but probably we won't get the right kind of political change unless we have change at the individual level.
Okay, thank you.
That's why self-transformation is fundamental, because we need people to actually have affectively and rationally grasped that we need to live our lives individually and collectively differently. And I think the pandemic has shaken us up a bit. Maybe not enough. Maybe people have slipped back into old ways of thinking and acting. But I think at this moment in time, there is at least some hope that this interaction between policies and laws and individual feelings and thinking that it might mesh in some way. But we definitely need people to be willing to change their practices. And their ways of living their own lives.
Thank you.
Okay, Ali Said hocam.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this great speech, Professor Cooke. Maybe I ask the same question. I don't know if I repeat the same question that Karim Hoca asked. But first, I want to remind you referred to Marx's alienation, and as you know, in the German ideology, Marx also claims that consciousness is determined by being, by a very famous formulation. So being for him is proletariat, worker class, and for any Marxist, as you know, maybe you met already with this kind of statement. Who could be, right? Who could be the actor of the transformation? Even you emphasize self-determination, the individual individual attempts. But we live in social and economic, as you know, in capitalistic systems, everyone, I think, in this world. And we are weak, very, very weak, if as subjects, right? So even we have sometimes very different imaginations for better world, but we couldn't realize that. So in your speech, even you, I think you do not want to talk about that about this problem of politics, the problem of who could be actor, a real actor today after very desperate situation after any socialism or any theory of any Marxist theory. So I wonder, what can you say more about that, if you want?
I mean, I'm just to repeat. It's a really crucial question, and I think I'm just repeating myself when I'm answering it, because what I say certainly is not satisfactory from the point of view of, say, a Marxist theory or any of the main theories we're familiar of social or political change we're familiar with. And the problem is that we're in a new situation. You know, the kind of change that's needed is on every level. The Anthropocene is ecological disaster, touches every aspect of human life. So it's not just a question of economic change or political change or social change. It's a question of everything and changing consciousness all at once. And I can't offer, I can't tell anybody how this is going to happen. All I can say is we have to operate on multiple levels. We have to, on the level of laws and new institutions, on the level of policies, on the level of collective action, on the level of individual life practices. So, meditation by all means, but I think this is kind of actually very important. Sport, but on the level of the way in which we exercise and so on, and that's what I mean by sport. But we need to do all these things, and we need to take a more expansive view of how transformation is possible and what counts as transformation. And I think maybe this will give you a clearer picture. Well, I didn't mention this at all, but in my broader project I do. What I'm inviting people to imagine is a form of, if you like, revolutionary, in the sense of fundamental change to society that takes place in an incremental, so step by step, sometimes quite slow step way, that doesn't it's not linear either. We can't say we just we make one change and we're going to build on that. So it's kind of it's much more it's on the level of micro politics, on the level of increment. I mean, I actually find the work of Michel Foucault quite helpful here, when he's he in the 1970s and early 80s, he was very critical of revolution speak, if you like, and he says he much prefers the kind of fundamental changes that take place in, if you like, the in micro contexts, in smaller contexts, changes to self-understandings, the changes in gender relations that take place on the level of self-understandings. I mean, the social media haven't been mentioned here at all. I mean, social media are a force for transformation for the better and worse in this respect. But the kind of fundamental change I'm thinking of is not this like clean break. It's not the if you like caricature of the Marxist idea. We'd have a revolution and everything will be better after that. It's micro change on an incremental level, and that's why I think we have to rethink our ideas of what social change is and revolution is in particular.
I think if we could add
Yes.
a macro theory with your theory about self transformation, then we can be successful, I think.
I agree. I mean, I think without some version of fundamental economic change and change in capitalist relations, nothing is going to change. So, you know, I'm leaving open whether it's possible that we would have some form of capitalism, you know, that is compatible with the vision I'm offering. I don't want to say from the get-go, you know, this is an anti-capitalist, but I find myself hard to imagine how capitalism in any of its present versions could remain. And certainly, but, you know, it's also transitional. So, you know, maybe we just have to build on impulses at the moment that are trying to harness the power of capitalism. For example, I'm reading a very interesting kind of science fiction novel. It starts in the 2023, so only a little bit in the future. It was written in 2018 or 19, where you know, one of the ways this world in 2029 has introduced a new currency based on the conservation, on the non-use of carbon, a new coin. So it's still capitalist in the sense that there are markets for this currency, but the currency rewards people who don't use carbon. So there are transitional mechanisms that are conceivable within the terms of capitalism, but in the end might mean an end to capitalism as we know it. So I'm leaving that open, but I agree with you. You know, Marx was right in many respects.
Thank you.
Erdal Hocam, you have.
Yeah, Hocam, thank you. My question is about your mention concerning good law, good rule. Yeah, when you answered to some question, you said in order to create, develop an ecologically attuned ethics, perhaps we need good law, good rules, because you know, this kind of laws can change our attitude, and then we can create a good, let's say, maybe society atmosphere in favor of all entities. So I think this approach is so close to rule-based ethical perspective. So, you know, rule-based ethical approach, whether utilitarian or the ontological ethic, emphasize we need the law, good law, and according to this good law, we should organize our life, our behavior, etc. But on the other side, there is a virtue-based, you know, approach. Virtue-based approach, especially in recent time, argues that, you know, in modern time, many ethicists, philosophers like Kant, Jeremy Bentham, and you know, and the other ethicist philosophers determine some, you know, ethical rules, good rules according to them, and they ask us to live, act according to these rules. But now we'll see we destroyed, you know, our nature, our world, etc. So these rules don't work. So we don't need actually this kind of law. We need some virtues by you know, through these virtues we can live, you know, very well in this world. For this can be good for every entities. For instance, if I say concerning smoking, if I say to my son, smoking is not good for healthy, but if I am smoking, this doesn't work, you know. So, but if I don't smoke, so you know, my children imitate and they can not smoke. So I think your approach is so close to a rule-based approach. What do you think about this?
I disagree. That's
Okay.
my approach is because I share your worries about purely rule-based or primarily rule-based approaches. Maybe because I have these worries about authoritarianism, which I mentioned in the paper, I want to nonetheless say that laws are important, but I see laws as always open to question, otherwise they're authoritarian. So I have developed an account of authority as authoritative, but non-authoritarian. So we need authority, like, you know, the parent that guides the child in the right direction, but we're not children. So we should be, and that's why protest and resistance is very much a part of my approach as kind of an agonistic approach. If we disagree that it's the right direction, then we should challenge it, and we should do this, you know, at the extreme through, you know, all forms of resistance, civil disobedience, and even more extreme uprisings. If we really think the direction the laws are pushing us in, or are insisting we live our lives, are not the right ones, or if they're authoritarian, if they don't allow for questioning and input by citizens. So so I would say, I think a good law helps us individually, in the first instance, to develop the kinds of virtues we need to lead a good life. Otherwise, it's not a good law. And then we can challenge it because it's saying it's requiring us to live in ways which are non-virtuous or aren't actually helping us. But good laws we have to cultivate the ways of life that we are being offered through good laws, but the good laws can help to reinforce that cultivation. So, you know, at the beginning, I know, you know, non-smokers, Ireland became, people in Ireland 30 years ago used to smoke, I'm sure it's true in many parts of Turkey still, let's say 25 years ago, 22 years ago, I think the ban was introduced 22 years ago. Irish people flout laws, they don't like laws, you know, so they used to smoke in front of, you know, no smoking bans. So I'm just going to take the hook here, yeah. And then a law came in. I remember sitting beside people in, you know, I said, we all said, this is not going to work, you know, this is not going to work. But it did. And why? Because I know just before the government introduced the no smoking ban, I sat beside people, you know, on the bus, in a taxi, in a pub, and they said, you know, smokers who said, we want this new law, you know, we know smoking isn't good for us. We want that push that helps us to lead our lives in the right direction. And without the law, they wouldn't have had the social confidence to say, you know, no, we shouldn't be smoking. Let's, you know, or let's smoke outside or something like this. So a good law works with the individual behavior and consciousness in a kind of a symbiotic relationship, but it's also symbiotic, but always potentially antagonistic if the law ends up not being something that helps us as we see it to lead a better life, if that makes sense. So it's somewhere between virtue ethics and Kantian ethics.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to give the word to myself. Yeah, all this reconceptualizing, re-envisioning freedom, the ethical agency, this ethically non-hierarchical form that is, I think, present in your view. For the moment, of course, the human being is favored, I'm going to say, because although it might be possible to attribute rights to rivers and change democratic institutions. It's the human being that's going to do this. However, and that's fine when there's no rivalry, as is the case today. But once possibly AI, artificial intelligence, kicks off and there is a genuine competitor, I mean, I'm not saying that it needs to be a competitor, but it might be in the future. So this re-envisioning freedom, does that include in any part of your project these alternate ways of beings that, I mean, obviously they're different from rocks and mountains and rivers in that they are, I mean, quote unquote, rational, quote unquote, conscious, quote unquote, possibly ethical agents as well?
That's a really difficult question, and a really a good question. And I haven't any well worked out, even a badly worked out answer to it, really. I mean, two thoughts I have. One is that as I hinted at, or I said, you know, every so often in my answers earlier, certain forms of anthropocentrism are unavoidable. And one form that seems to be unavoidable is that we have to see the world through the perspective of human concerns and interests, but we can take a much less human-centered view of what human concerns and interests are. But there's still human concerns and interests as seen through our lens. What about the products of human activity, such as you know, robots and drones and agents that seem to develop an agency of their own? Of course, they have agencies of their own, and I think the picture I'm offering is a picture of agencies such as, you know, I mean, that's just a very banal example of it, is drones or robots or certain kinds of computers. They're part of our lives now, you know. I think my ecologically attuned perspective requires us to be attentive to their specific forms of agency, and to see them as having a value independent of human concerns. So a drone, for instance, could have a value, an ethical value, because it helps humans to be less destructive of their environment, irrespective of whether humans want to or not. You know, it could be actually in the interest of the biosphere to have certain forms of artificial agency, irrespective of whether humans subjectively think this is good or bad. But at the same time, we will always be evaluating the interests and concerns that we attribute to other agencies, stones, rivers, mobile phones, robots, agencies, from the point of view of, from a human-centered point of view. It can just be less ethically human-centered. I mean, that's not very satisfactory, but I think we have to be, I don't know is my answer. I think I don't think I think we're heading for a situation where there isn't such a clear division. It's not clear anymore what artificial intelligence is. You know, this comes back to the question earlier about eco-modernism. But what's still very clear in my own thinking is the importance of self-determining, critically reflective human agencies. So I'm keeping hold of that, and that will, of course, impact on how we think about other agents, and it builds a definite human-centeredness into my approach. You know, my thought is only that it's a less ecologically destructive kind of human-centeredness than we have at the moment. It doesn't, that's what I'm saying, but it's still human-centered, and that seems to be inevitable. And that's why we need a much, much richer and more complex account of what human-centeredness is and various forms of anthropocentrism. So it's really just, I have to, this is all terrain that needs to be explored. And I think you're absolutely right to draw our attention to it.
Thank you. All right, well, we are already past 8 o'clock, so it has been a very rich, very great discussion. Thank you very much to everyone that has participated, and thank you, of course, especially to Professor Maeve Cooke for the talk and for all these insightful comments and answers you have given during the Q&A as well.
Thank you very much, and thanks everybody out there. Really, really thought-provoking and relevant questions, and it was really a pleasure to be part of this this discussion. And I know for me it's only 5 o'clock, just past 5 o'clock here, so I can still go and do something outside, have dinner, and 8 o'clock is already very late. So thank you all for at the end of a long working day. So thank you all for your fortitude and perseverance in discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.